Imagine living your entire life in complete darkness, not for a day, not for a year, but from the very moment you were born. Imagine never seeing the face of your mother, never watching a sunrise, never knowing the color of the sky. Now imagine that everyone around you believes your suffering is God's punishment. But what if one encounter could change everything? What if the man everyone ignored became the center of one of the greatest miracles Jesus ever performed? Stay with this story, because what happened next shocked an entire nation and revealed a truth that still changes lives today. Long before the miracle, there was only silence, darkness, and waiting. The city of Jerusalem woke before dawn. Roosters crowed from rooftops. Merchants unlocked wooden doors and arranged baskets filled with figs, grapes, dates, bread, and fragrant spices. The smell of fresh bread drifted through the narrow streets as families prepared for another day. Children laughed as they chased one another through the crowded alleys, while pilgrims made their way toward the temple to worship God. For most people, it was another ordinary morning. But for one man, every morning was exactly the same. He sat beside a busy road wrapped in an old cloak worn thin by years of use. His walking stick rested beside him, and his hands reached toward the sound of passing footsteps. His eyes were open, yet they had never seen light. Since the day he was born, darkness had been his only companion. He did not know what blue looked like. He had never seen the stars. He had never watched rain fall from the heavens. He had never looked into the eyes of the people speaking to him. Everything he knew about the world came through sound, touch, smell, and imagination. When people described mountains, he imagined their greatness. When they spoke of flowers, he imagined their beauty. When they described the golden glow of sunset, he could only wonder what such a sight might be like. Sometimes he would ask children to describe the world around him. Their answers filled his heart with both joy and sadness. There are birds flying above us. The sky is clear today. The temple shines in the sunlight. He smiled every time he heard those descriptions, yet deep inside, a question remained. Would he ever see any of it? Every morning he stretched out his hands and quietly asked strangers for help. A little kindness, please. Most people ignored him completely. Some tossed him a small coin without stopping. Others spoke words that hurt more deeply than hunger. There goes the man born under God's curse. What terrible sin brought this upon him? Perhaps his parents offended God. The blind man heard every cruel whisper. At first, he cried. Later, he simply accepted them. Year after year, those words became part of his life. Many people believed suffering always came because of personal sin. They looked at the blind man and assumed God had rejected him. Very few stopped to consider that they were completely wrong. His parents loved him deeply. As a child, they carried him wherever he needed to go. His mother often held him close and prayed that one day God would show mercy. His father taught him to recognize voices, count his steps, and move carefully through familiar places. But as the years passed, age made caring for him more difficult. Eventually, the roadside became his daily workplace. Each morning his parents helped him reach the place where crowds passed by. Each evening they returned to guide him home. The routine never changed. Seasons came and went. Children he once heard playing beside him grew into adults. Some married. Some had families of their own. Life moved forward for everyone except the blind man. His world remained trapped in endless darkness. Yet something unusual had begun happening throughout Israel. Stories spread from village to village. Travelers whispered about a teacher from Galilee unlike anyone they had ever seen. Some called him a prophet. Others believed he was the promised Messiah. Many simply called him Jesus. People told astonishing stories. A man covered with leprosy had been made clean with a touch. A paralyzed man had stood and walked. Storms obeyed his command. Demons fled when he spoke. Thousands gathered wherever he traveled because hope followed him everywhere he went. The blind man listened carefully whenever travelers mentioned Jesus. Could these stories really be true? Could anyone possess such power? He wanted to believe. But after years of disappointment, hope had become dangerous. Hope could easily become heartbreak. So he listened without expecting anything. He never imagined that the greatest miracle of his life was already drawing near. On that very day, Jesus entered Jerusalem with his disciples. The streets were crowded with people eager to hear him teach. Some followed because they believed. Others followed because they doubted. Among them were religious leaders watching every move he made, hoping to find a reason to accuse him. Jesus walked calmly through the city, speaking gently with his disciples. Suddenly, he stopped. His disciples looked ahead to see what had captured his attention. There, sitting beside the road exactly where he had sat for years, was the blind beggar. Hundreds of people had passed him that morning without a second glance. To most, he was invisible. To Jesus, he was not. Jesus saw more than a blind man. He saw a life the Father was about to transform. He saw a testimony that would echo through generations. He saw a heart ready to believe. The disciples looked at the blind man and asked the question many people had been asking for years. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? The question reflected a common belief of the time. They assumed suffering always pointed to guilt. They expected Jesus to identify someone's sin. Instead, Jesus gave an answer that shattered their understanding. Neither this man nor his parents sinned. This happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Those words changed everything. The blind man's suffering was not proof that God had abandoned him. It was about to become the stage upon which God's glory would be revealed. The disciples stood in thoughtful silence. The crowd leaned closer. No one knew they were about to witness a miracle unlike any they had ever seen. Jesus took another step toward the man who had never seen his face but was about to experience his love. Jesus stood quietly before the man. The noise of the city continued around them, yet for a brief moment it felt as though everything else had faded away. The blind man heard gentle footsteps stop directly in front of him. He tilted his head slightly, listening. There was something different about this silence. Most people either tossed him a coin and hurried away or ignored him completely. But this person had stopped without speaking. There was no sound of impatience, no sigh of annoyance, no mocking laughter. Only compassion. The blind man could not explain it, but peace settled over his heart. Jesus looked at the disciples and then at the gathering crowd. "As long as I am in the world," he said, "I am the light of the world." Those words carried a depth that few understood. Standing before a man who had never seen a single ray of sunlight, Jesus declared himself to be the true light, not only for blind eyes, but for every heart living in darkness. Then, to the surprise of everyone watching, Jesus knelt down. He reached toward the dusty ground. His fingers gathered a handful of dry earth. The crowd watched with puzzled expressions. "What is he doing?" Some moved closer to see. Others whispered among themselves. Jesus spat gently onto the dust and began mixing it with his fingers until it became soft clay. Children stared in amazement. Adults exchanged confused glances. No one had ever seen a healer do such a thing. Yet every movement pointed back to the beginning of creation. The God who formed the first man from the dust of the earth was about to demonstrate his creative power once again. The blind man remained perfectly still. He heard the sound of Jesus' hands moving through the dirt. He felt someone kneel before him. Then two gentle hands touched his face. For years, strangers had pulled him roughly out of the way. Some had shoved him aside. Others had grabbed him carelessly. But these hands were different. They carried tenderness. They carried authority. Jesus carefully spread the cool clay across the man's lifeless eyes. The crowd fell silent. Every person watched without blinking. No one dared interrupt. The blind man did not resist. He trusted the voice he had just heard. He trusted the hands resting upon his face. When Jesus finished, he spoke only a few words. Go, wash in the Pool of Siloam. That was all. No dramatic announcement. No loud command. No instant miracle. Just a simple instruction. The blind man sat quietly for a moment. Nothing had changed. Darkness still surrounded him. The cool clay covered his eyes. He could have questioned Jesus. He could have demanded an explanation. Instead, he chose obedience. Slowly, he reached for his walking stick. With careful movements, he stood. His legs trembled slightly. Not because he was weak, because hope was beginning to awaken. Hope can be frightening when disappointment has lasted a lifetime. Each step toward the Pool of Siloam required faith. He still could not see, yet he believed enough to obey. People watched as he carefully walked through the crowded streets. Some recognized him immediately. Isn't that the blind beggar? It is. What happened to his face? Why is there mud covering his eyes? Others laughed. Perhaps someone played a trick on him. Still, he continued walking. He ignored every voice except the one echoing in his memory. Go, Washington. The streets of Jerusalem stretched before him. Though blind, he knew many of the familiar sounds. The marketplace echoed with merchants calling out prices. Donkeys pulled heavy carts over the stone roads. Women carried jars filled with water. Roman soldiers marched in formation, their armor clinking with every step. The city was alive, and somewhere within it, the Son of God watched a miracle unfold through one man's obedience. As the blind man moved forward, several people noticed his determination. One young boy ran beside him. Sir, are you all right? I'm looking for the Pool of Siloam. The boy hesitated. You can't see. No. Then how will you find it? The blind man smiled. I was told to go there. There was such confidence in his voice that the boy became curious. I'll help you. Soon another man joined them. Then an elderly woman. Without realizing it, they became part of the miracle simply by helping someone obey the words of Jesus. Together they slowly guided him through the winding streets. At last they heard the gentle sound of moving water. The cool breeze rising from the pool brushed against their faces. We're here, the elderly woman whispered. The helpers stepped back. The blind man knelt beside the water. His heart pounded so loudly he could hear it. This was the moment. Would anything happen? Or would he leave exactly as he had come? For a brief second, fear whispered to him, what if nothing changes? But another voice spoke louder in his heart. The man called Jesus sent you here. He dipped both hands into the cool water. Slowly he lifted the water to his face. The clay began to dissolve. He washed once. Nothing. He washed again. Still darkness. He washed a third time. Then, a faint glow. He froze. His breathing stopped. For the first time in his life, darkness was no longer complete. A tiny spark of light appeared where endless night had always been. His heart raced. He blinked repeatedly. The glow became brighter. Shadows formed before him. Shapes slowly emerged from the darkness. His hands trembled. He splashed more water across his eyes. The blur began to disappear. Suddenly, brilliant sunlight flooded his vision. He gasped. The sky stretched endlessly above him. The water shimmered before him like liquid crystal. People surrounded the pool, their faces filled with amazement. He could see. He truly could see. He looked down at his own hands. For the first time, he saw the fingers that had begged beside the road for so many years. He turned toward the elderly woman who had helped him. Tears streamed down her face. "You can see me," she whispered. "Yes," he replied, his own voice breaking with emotion. "I can see." Joy exploded through the crowd. People shouted praises to God. Some laughed. Others cried openly. Many fell to their knees in amazement. The man who had been born blind stood in the middle of them, overwhelmed by a world he had only imagined. Every color was more beautiful than he had dreamed. Every face told a story. Every ray of sunlight felt like a gift from heaven. He lifted his eyes toward the sky. The first thing he had ever seen was the magnificent creation of God. And in that unforgettable moment, the miracle that began beside a dusty road became impossible for all Jerusalem to ignore.